Hey there, I'm Dwayne 24, and currently crushing it at a tech startup in Seattle. Not bad for a guy whose parents drained his college fund for his sister's medical school, right? 3 years ago, I walked away from a family that always put me second armed with nothing but my community college degree and determination. I built a life they said I couldn't have without their help. Now they're suddenly begging me to come home for Christmas. The irony isn't lost on me. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if family drama hits close to home. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where our two-story colonial house stood among dozens of similar homes. My father, Robert, worked as a bank manager, while my mother, Linda, taught third grade at the local elementary school. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family: dad, mom, older sister, Angela, and me. But inside those walls, the family dynamic was anything but equal. As far back as I can remember, my sister Angela was the golden child. She was 4 years older than me, with the same dark hair and eyes as our mother. Angela played violin, ran track, and maintained a perfect GPA throughout school. My parents beamed with pride at her recitals and competitions, while I sat quietly in the audience clapping when appropriate. It wasn't that my parents were cruel or abusive. They provided for my basic needs, attended my parent-teacher conferences, and remembered my birthdays. But there was always this undercurrent of imbalance, subtle enough that neighbors and extended family might not notice, yet painfully obvious to me. The slightly bigger bedroom for Angela, the newer clothes, the greater enthusiasm when discussing her achievements. From an early age, I found refuge in technology. When I was 7, my grandfather Joe gave me his old desktop computer. While other kids played outside, I spent hours taking it apart, putting it back together, and learning how it worked. That old gateway became my sanctuary, the place where I excelled without needing validation from my parents. "You've got a special mind, Dwayne," my grandfather would tell me during our weekend visits. "Computers are the future, and you're going to be part of that." He was the one who truly saw me, who made me feel valued. When I won my first programming contest at age 12, it was Grandpa Joe who took me out for ice cream to celebrate. My parents acknowledged it with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," as they prepared for Angela's violin recital that same evening. My grandparents established college funds for both Angela and me when we were born. Each of us had approximately $85,000 set aside for our education, a generous sum that accumulated through careful investments over the years. It was their way of ensuring we could pursue higher education without the burden of excessive student loans. Throughout high school, I poured myself into academics and technology, hoping that achievement might finally earn my parents' recognition. I founded our school's robotics club, won regional programming competitions, and graduated with a 4.0 GPA. My college applications included schools with top computer science programs, with MIT being my dream school. The day my MIT acceptance letter arrived was one of the happiest of my life. I remember staring at the email in disbelief, then printing it out to show my family. My mother glanced at it and said, "That's wonderful, but isn't that school very expensive?" My father added, "You know, state schools offer good computer programs too." Later that evening, they spent an hour on the phone with Angela, excitedly discussing her medical school interviews. My grandfather passed away during my junior year of high school, followed by my grandmother just 6 months later. Their loss hit me particularly hard, as they had been my most consistent source of support and encouragement. At the funeral, my mother remarked how proud they would have been of Angela pursuing medicine. I stood silently by the casket, mourning not just my grandparents, but the loss of the only people who had truly championed my dreams. Looking back, there were signs of my parents' financial mismanagement. Whispered arguments about credit card bills, the second mortgage they took out to renovate the kitchen, the occasional comments about waiting until payday to make larger purchases. But at 17, focused on my future at MIT, I didn't recognize these as warning signs of what was to come. Angela had always been academically gifted, but her path wasn't without challenges. She struggled with organic chemistry her sophomore year of college, requiring an expensive tutor. When she decided to switch majors from biology to psychology, extending her undergraduate studies by a semester, my parents covered the additional costs without complaint. "Your sister is finding her path," they explained when I questioned the expense of an extra study abroad semester in London. Education is the most important investment. Little did I know how prophetic those words would become, and at what cost to my own future. Senior year of high school should have been exciting. My MIT acceptance was secured. I had a solid group of friends, and graduation loomed on the horizon with all its promise. Instead, it became the year everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled beneath me. The first sign came in February. Angela had been accepted to Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, a prestigious but expensive private institution. My parents threw a celebration dinner, inviting extended family and even some neighbors. I remember my mother tearing up as she toasted the future Dr. Winters in our family. I was genuinely happy for my sister, proud even despite our complicated relationship. After that dinner, my parents' behavior changed. They began having hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. My father spent hours in his home office with the door closed, surrounded by financial statements. My mother started picking up extra tutoring sessions after school. When I asked if everything was okay, they assured me it was just adult stuff I shouldn't worry about. In April, about a month before graduation, I came home from robotics club to find both my parents sitting at the kitchen table. Their faces wore identical expressions of grim determination that made my stomach drop before they even spoke. "Dwayne, we need to talk about college." My father began, his voice carefully measured. "About your college fund." I sat down slowly, already sensing what was coming. My mother reached across the table, as if to take my hand, then withdrew when she saw my expression. "Angela's medical school tuition is much higher than we anticipated," my father continued. "Even with scholarships, the cost is substantial. We've looked at every option," my mother added quickly. "We've even taken out additional loans ourselves, but it's not enough." My father cleared his throat. "We've had to make a difficult decision. We've borrowed from your college fund to cover Angela's first 2 years of medical school." The word borrowed hung in the air between us. I stared at them, waiting for more explanation, for the solution, for anything that would make this make sense. "How much?" I finally asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. They exchanged glances. "$70,000, my father admitted. $70,000 out of $85,000. Nearly 83% of my entire future gone. "It's just a loan," my mother hurried to add. "We'll pay it back. Angela will too, once she's established in her practice." I remember laughing then, a sharp, painful sound that made both my parents flinch. "When exactly?" "In 10 years, 12. After her residency, after her loans, after she's established. I'm supposed to start college in 4 months. MIT offers excellent financial aid," my father said weakly. "And there are student loans." "The same loans you're protecting Angela from," I interrupted. "The loans you've always said would cripple our futures if we had to take them." "Medicine is different," my mother insisted. "The cost of education is just higher, and she'll be saving lives, Dwayne. This is her dream." "And what about my dream?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "Does that matter at all?" The argument that followed was like nothing we'd ever experienced in our household. Years of suppressed feelings erupted as I confronted them about the lifetime of favoritism, the constant prioritization of Angela above me. My father grew defensive, then angry, insisting they had always treated us equally. My mother cried, repeating that they loved us both the same. But the money told a different story. Their actions spoke louder than any words they could offer. When Angela came home that weekend, I expected her to show some remorse, some recognition of the sacrifice being forced upon me. Instead, she seemed annoyed by the tension in the house. "You can just go to state school," she said dismissively when I confronted her. "Computer stuff doesn't really need fancy degrees anyway. Most tech billionaires dropped out." "That's not the point," I tried to explain. "That money was for my education. Grandpa and Grandma set it aside specifically for me." She rolled her eyes. "They set aside money for both of us, and medical school is way more expensive than undergrad. It's just practical, Dwayne. Don't be so dramatic." That moment crystallized everything for me. It wasn't just my parents who saw me as less deserving. Angela had internalized that same belief. In their eyes, her dreams would always take precedence over mine. In the weeks that followed, I researched alternatives to MIT. The remaining $15,000 in my fund wouldn't even cover a year at most four-year institutions. Community college became my only viable option if I wanted to avoid crushing debt. When I told my parents I would be attending Lancaster Community College in the fall, they seemed relieved rather than disappointed. "That's very practical, Dwayne," my father said, patting my shoulder. "You can transfer to a four-year school later." The subtext was clear. Unlike Angela's education, mine could wait. Mine could be compromised. Mine was simply less important. The night before graduation, I had one final conversation with my parents about the situation. I laid out exactly how their decision had made me feel, not just the practical implications for my education, but the emotional message it sent about my worth in our family. For perhaps the first time, they seemed to truly hear me. My father stared at his hands as I spoke. My mother wiped away silent tears. "We never meant to hurt you," she whispered when I finished. "I know," I replied. "That's what makes it worse. You didn't even consider that this would hurt me, because you've never really considered me at all." That night I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would accept the circumstances I couldn't change, but I would no longer accept being an afterthought in my own family. Something fundamental had broken between us, and while I couldn't yet see the full path forward, I knew it led away from that house and the people in it. The day after graduation, I moved out of my parents' house and into a cramped apartment with two guys I barely knew: Jason, who worked night shifts at a hospital, and Marcus, a music major who practiced drums at all hours. The apartment was in a run-down building just off campus with peeling linoleum and a persistent smell of old cooking oil, but the rent was cheap enough that I could afford it with my savings and part-time job. I found work at CompFix, a local computer repair shop owned by a gruff but fair-minded man named Ray. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but the flexible hours allowed me to schedule around my classes. More importantly, it gave me hands-on experience with hardware and customer service that would prove invaluable later. My life became a carefully calibrated machine of efficiency and exhaustion. Mornings for classes, afternoons and evenings for work, late nights for studying and assignments. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford in sufficient quantities. My diet consisted primarily of ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever food was being offered at campus events. Meanwhile, through occasional phone calls and social media, I glimpsed Angela's very different reality. She had a spacious apartment in Philadelphia paid for by our parents. When her laptop died during her first semester, they immediately purchased a new high-end MacBook Pro for her studies. For Christmas that year, they helped her lease a new Honda Civic because public transportation wasn't safe for late-night study sessions at the library. The contrast was stark and painful. While I counted pennies for laundry quarters, Angela posted photos of weekend trips to New York City with her medical school friends. While I pulled all-nighters to maintain my GPA while working 40 hours a week, my sister complained about the pressure of medical school, pressure she faced without the additional burden of financial survival. My first trip home for Thanksgiving was a mistake I didn't repeat. My mother had set the table with Angela's achievements as the main course: her excellent grades, her impressive professors, her promising future. My community college experience was treated as a charming little side story, something to nod at politely before returning to the real success in the family. "Dwayne is doing the sensible thing," my father said, as if my choice had been voluntary, building a foundation before transferring. When I mentioned the dean's list and my perfect 4.0 GPA, my mother smiled and said, "That's wonderful, honey," before immediately turning to Angela. "Tell everyone about that special research opportunity your anatomy professor mentioned." I left early the next morning, making an excuse about covering a shift for a coworker. The truth was, I couldn't bear another minute of being invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. But as the months passed, something unexpected happened. I began to build a life that was entirely my own, free from the shadow of comparison that had defined my childhood. Ray, my boss at CompFix, became something of a mentor, a self-taught computer expert who had built his business from nothing. He recognized something in me that my family never had, potential that had nothing to do with my sister or anyone else. "You've got good instincts," he told me after I correctly diagnosed a particularly tricky motherboard issue. "Better than half the certified techs I've hired." Keep developing that skill and you can write your own ticket anywhere. At the community college, I found professors who were passionate about teaching, who knew my name and took genuine interest in my goals. Professor Martinez, who taught my advanced programming class, stayed after hours to help me develop an app idea I had been tinkering with. Professor Whitaker in the business department connected me with local entrepreneurs who needed technical assistance, giving me my first freelance clients. I also found friendship in unexpected places. Brandon was a fellow computer science student with an uncanny ability to find humor in the darkest situations. We met during a late-night study session in the campus library, bonding over caffeine and coding errors. "Family's overrated anyway," he told me after I finally shared my story. "Mine kicked me out at 17 when I came out. Best thing that ever happened to me. Found my real family after that. People who choose to love you, not just the ones assigned by genetics." Brandon's philosophy became my lifeline. If he could rebuild his sense of belonging from scratch, so could I. We supported each other through exams, job frustrations, and the emotional minefields of holiday seasons, when family estrangement feels most acute. Therapy also became an essential part of my journey. The community college offered free counseling services, and weekly sessions with Dr. Patel helped me process the anger and grief I carried. She introduced me to concepts like family systems, emotional neglect, and boundaries, giving me a framework to understand my experiences without drowning in them. "Your parents failed you," she said during one particularly intense session. "That's a fact. But their failure doesn't define your worth or your future. Only you get to decide that." Those words became my mantra during the hardest days when doubt and resentment threatened to consume me. I taped them to my bathroom mirror, repeating them each morning as I prepared to face another day of work and study. By the end of my first year, I had established a rhythm to my new life. The exhaustion never fully disappeared, but it took on a different quality, the fatigue of building something meaningful rather than merely surviving. My freelance client list grew, providing additional income that allowed me to cut back slightly on my hours at CompFix. My programming skills advanced rapidly through practical application and self-directed learning beyond my coursework. Social media became both a torment and a motivation. Each glimpse of Angela's life, her white coat ceremony, her spring break in Miami, the expensive watch our parents gave her for her birthday, triggered a familiar pain. But I used that pain as fuel, channeling it into late-night coding sessions and ambitious projects that would eventually form my professional portfolio. When I made Dean's List for the third consecutive semester, I didn't bother sharing the news with my family. Instead, I celebrated with Brandon Ray and a few other friends who had become my chosen family, people who cheered my successes without qualification or comparison. This was the beginning of my realization that I didn't need my parents' approval to validate my path. Their opinion of my worth had never been accurate anyway. The truth about who I was and what I could achieve existed independently of their ability to see it. That truth would eventually lead me far from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to opportunities they had never imagined possible for their second-best child. 2 years passed in this fashion, working, studying, building my skills and my independence. When graduation from Lancaster Community College approached, I felt a complex mix of pride in my accomplishment and lingering resentment that this was not the graduation I had once envisioned for myself. Despite everything, I invited my parents to the ceremony. Part of me still craved their recognition, still hoped they might finally see me clearly. They attended, sitting stiffly in folding chairs as I walked across the stage to receive my associate's degree in computer science with highest honors. Afterward, during the obligatory photos and awkward small talk, my mother mentioned that Angela would be finishing her second year of medical school the following week. "We're flying out to Philadelphia to help her move to a nicer apartment closer to the hospital for her clinical rotations," she said, showing me pictures of a modern building with a doorman and rooftop pool. "The neighborhood is much safer, and the commute will be easier during those long hospital shifts." I nodded, the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "Sounds nice." "We're so proud of how well she's doing," my father added. "Top quarter of her class despite the pressure." Angela herself arrived late to my graduation celebration dinner, having deigned to drive the hour and a half from Philadelphia. She greeted me with a distracted hug before launching into stories about her challenging neurology rotation and brilliant supervising physician. When the conversation eventually turned to my plans, I mentioned the job offer I'd received from Technova, a growing startup in Seattle, specializing in cloud security solutions. Seattle. That's so far away, my mother said, frowning. Wouldn't it make more sense to look for something local? I saw that the bank where your father works is hiring IT support staff. This is an actual development position, I explained. Building security protocols for enterprise clients. The salary is $75,000 to start with stock options. My father looked impressed despite himself, but Angela rolled her eyes. It's just a community college degree, Mom. I'm sure it's just basic tech support with a fancy title. That comment cracked something inside me that had been barely holding together. Actually, Angela, they were more interested in my portfolio of actual work and skills than where my degree came from. Something you wouldn't understand since you've never had to prove your worth beyond a piece of paper with your name on it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother cleared her throat. Dwayne, that's not fair. Your sister works very hard. So do I replied evenly. The difference is I've had to do it without financial support, without encouragement, and without anyone believing in me. We believe in you, my father protested weakly. You tolerate me. There's a difference. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents defending their choices and minimizing my feelings as they always had. Angela, for her part, seemed genuinely bewildered by my anger, as if the inherent unfairness had never once occurred to her. The final blow came as we were paying the bill. Angela casually mentioned she would need about $8,000 to relocate for her residency interviews in the coming year. The flights and hotels add up quickly, and I'll need appropriate clothes for each program, she explained. Plus, I might need to put down deposits on apartments in multiple cities until I know where I match. Without hesitation, my father nodded. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can tap into the home equity line again. I stared at them in disbelief. My parents were still struggling financially, evidenced by my father's older model phone and my mother's comment about postponing some home repairs, yet they didn't even question this additional expense for Angela. Unbelievable, I muttered, throwing my napkin on the table and standing up. 3 years later, and nothing has changed. What's that supposed to mean? My mother asked, her voice tight. The dam broke. Every thought and feeling I'd carefully processed in therapy, but never expressed directly to them, came pouring out in the middle of the Olive Garden. It means you're still sacrificing your own financial security for Angela, while you couldn't even congratulate me properly on my accomplishments. It means you're still acting like her needs automatically outweigh everyone else's. It means you still don't see the pattern that's been happening my entire life. That's not true, my father said, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Isn't it you took my future to give her a better one? You justified it as a loan you've never made any attempt to repay. You dismissed my education as less valuable than hers. And now you're going to drain your retirement for her residency interviews, while you suggested I apply for an IT support role instead of taking a job that could actually advance my career. Angela huffed indignantly. Medicine is more demanding than playing with computers all day. The financial investment reflects that. Playing with computers, I laughed bitterly. My playing is about to earn me more in my first year than you'll make in your first 3 years of residency. The difference is, I did it without taking opportunities from anyone else. I grabbed my jacket and turned to leave, then paused for one final thought. I'm moving to Seattle next week. I don't expect you to understand or support that decision because you never have. But I want you to know that whatever success I achieve from this point forward will be in spite of you, not because of you. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and anger, but underneath ran a current of something that felt surprisingly like relief. For years I had been trying to earn the love and recognition that should have been freely given. In that moment I finally accepted that it would never come, and that I no longer needed it to move forward. The next morning I began packing for Seattle. I made no further attempts to contact my family before leaving. My mother called twice, leaving voicemails that avoided addressing any of the issues I had raised, instead focusing on practical questions about my move and reminders to drive safely. My cross-country drive became a symbolic journey, each mile putting distance between me and the family dynamic that had defined and constrained me for so long. I stopped at the Grand Canyon, stood at the edge of that vast emptiness, and felt a strange kinship with the landscape. Something massive had been carved away, leaving both destruction and beauty in its wake. When I reached Seattle with its evergreen surroundings and gleaming skyline against mountain backdrops, I felt like I could finally breathe. This was my fresh start, my chance to define myself on my own terms, without the shadow of comparison or the weight of unmet expectations. I sent my parents a brief text, letting them know I had arrived safely. My mother responded with a thumbs-up emoji. My father didn't respond at all. And just like that, the last tether to my old life seemed to snap, setting me adrift in a sea of possibilities I was finally free to explore. Seattle welcomed me with constant rain and steel-gray skies that somehow matched my emotional state during those first few months. My apartment was a tiny studio in Capitol Hill with barely enough room for a bed and desk, but the large window overlooking the bustling street below made it feel less confining. Technova occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the South Lake Union district. On my first day, I arrived an hour, early, rain-soaked and nervous, clutching a coffee as if it might shield me from the uncertainty ahead. My new manager, Erica, greeted me with a firm handshake and a tour that ended at my workstation, a proper desk with dual monitors and high-end equipment I could only have dreamed of back at CompFix. "We expect a lot," she told me frankly. "But we saw something special in your application. Don't be afraid to speak up and contribute from day one." Those words, "something special," echoed in my mind throughout that first week as I navigated new systems, new colleagues, and the particular culture of a growing tech company. No one here knew about my community college background or family drama. They knew me only by my code, my ideas, and my work ethic, a clean slate I was determined to fill with achievement. The learning curve was steep. I often stayed late into the evening absorbing new programming languages and security protocols, determined to prove that Erica's faith wasn't misplaced. Some nights I returned to my empty apartment and wondered if I had made a mistake coming so far from everything familiar. In those moments, the silence of my phone, no calls from family checking on me, was both a wound and a reminder of why I had left. But gradually, day by day, I built connections in this new city. A JavaScript meetup group that gathered weekly at a local brewery became my first social outlet. There I met developers from various companies across Seattle's tech landscape, many of whom had similarly unconventional paths into the industry. "Traditional credentials are becoming less relevant," explained Miguel, a senior developer at Amazon who had taught himself coding while working as a janitor. "What matters is what you can build and how quickly you can adapt." His words affirmed the path I had forged out of necessity rather than choice. Perhaps my detour through community college and hands-on work experience had equipped me with adaptability that my MIT peers might have lacked. 6 months into my time at Technova, I identified a vulnerability in our flagship security product, a subtle flaw in the authentication protocol that could potentially expose client data. Rather than simply reporting it, I spent a weekend developing a solution that not only patched the vulnerability but enhanced the system's overall performance. When I presented my findings and solution to the development team, the room fell silent. Then Erica smiled. "This is exactly why we hired you, Dwayne," she said, nodding appreciatively. "You don't just see problems, you solve them." That moment marked a turning point in my career at Technova. I was assigned to the core development team for our next-generation security platform, given additional responsibilities, and included in strategic planning meetings typically reserved for more senior staff. The startup culture suited me. Unlike the rigid hierarchy I had observed in my father's banking career, Technova valued ideas regardless of where they originated. My approach to problem-solving, shaped by years of making do with limited resources, brought a different perspective that complemented my colleagues' more traditional backgrounds. Outside of work, I slowly built a social circle. The meetup group introduced me to Brandon, a different Brandon than my friend from Lancaster, who invited me to join a recreational soccer league despite my protests about athletic ability. Through soccer, I met Sarah, a graphic designer with bright blue hair and a laugh that could cut through the constant Seattle drizzle. Sarah and I connected immediately over shared experiences of family estrangement. Her parents had cut contact when she left their evangelical church and embraced a more progressive lifestyle. Family is who shows up, she told me during one of our early coffee dates. Who sees you clearly and loves what they see. Sometimes that's the people who share your DNA, but often it's the ones you find along the way. Her perspective helped me process the sporadic, surface-level communications from my parents. They occasionally texted on holidays or birthdays, carefully avoiding any meaningful topics or acknowledgement of our last confrontation. My responses were equally polite and distant. We had become strangers who shared memories, but no longer shared lives. Through social media, I watched Angela graduate from medical school with honors. My parents posted dozens of photos from the ceremony and celebration dinner afterward. The contrast to my own graduation, marked by tension and criticism, wasn't lost on me, but rather than fueling resentment, it confirmed that my decision to create distance had been necessary for my own well-being. Meanwhile, Technova continued to grow, securing major contracts with financial institutions and healthcare providers. My role expanded accordingly, and my salary increased to reflect my contributions. After 18 months in Seattle, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small but modern condo in the Fremont neighborhood, my first real estate purchase made entirely with self-earned money. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I felt a surge of pride mixed with vindication. Without family connections, without the prestigious MIT degree that had been stolen from me, without any support beyond what I had built for myself, I had achieved financial stability and professional success that even my parents would have to respect. That evening I hosted a small housewarming gathering with the friends who had become my chosen family. Sarah brought homemade cookies. Miguel contributed expensive tequila, and various teammates from Technova and the soccer league filled my new space with laughter and genuine warmth. Looking around at these people who knew my present but not my past, who valued me without comparison to anyone else, I realized I had created something my parents had never given me: a sense of unconditional belonging. Therapy remained an important part of my journey. My new insurance covered weekly sessions with Dr. Rivera, who specialized in family trauma and helped me work through the complex grief of estrangement. Through her guidance, I learned to separate my worth from my parents' inability to recognize it, to see their limitations as reflections of their own issues rather than indicators of my value. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, she explained during one particularly difficult session. You can release the anger without inviting the same dynamics back into your life. Professional success continued to accelerate. At the 3-year mark, Technova was acquired by a larger tech corporation, resulting in a significant payout for early employees with stock options. Overnight, my net worth increased by several $100,000. Financial security I had never imagined possible when I was counting quarters for laundry in Lancaster. With this newfound stability came questions about what truly mattered to me. The corporate environment post-acquisition felt less innovative, less aligned with my values. I began exploring options for my next career move, possibly even starting my own security consulting firm. During this period of professional transition, occasional texts from my parents hinted at financial struggles. My father mentioned postponing retirement. My mother referenced picking up extra tutoring work. They never directly asked for help, but the implication hovered beneath their messages, a stark contrast to the lavish support they had always provided Angela. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at their predicament, the natural consequence of prioritizing one child's needs at the expense of their own financial health. But another part recognized this as an opportunity to demonstrate the person I had become, despite their failures, someone guided by his own moral compass rather than patterns of hurt. I didn't respond to these hints. Instead, I maintained the polite distance that had characterized our relationship for the past 3 years, until the phone call that would force me to confront the unresolved emotions I had carefully compartmentalized since leaving Pennsylvania. The call came on a Tuesday evening in early December, 3 weeks before Christmas. I was reviewing proposals from potential clients for my new consulting business when my father's name appeared on my phone screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, as I often did. Something, curiosity perhaps, or a lingering sense of obligation, made me answer. "Dwayne," my father said, his voice sounding older than I remembered. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I replied, the automatic response to a question that felt too casual for our estranged relationship. Is everything okay? A pause. Yes. Well, mostly. Your mother and I were hoping you might consider coming home for Christmas this year. The request caught me off guard. In the 3 years since I'd moved to Seattle, they had never explicitly invited me back for the holidays. Our limited communication had existed in a careful limbo, neither addressing nor resolving the past. Why now, I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. My father cleared his throat. It's been a long time. We miss you. And honestly, things haven't been great here. The conversation that followed revealed the situation in pieces. My father had been forced into early retirement when his bank downsized. My mother was still teaching but dealing with health issues that limited her ability to take on extra tutoring. Their mortgage was underwater after several refinances, most recently to help Angela with the down payment on her first house in Baltimore, where she had matched for residency. We thought she would help with our monthly expenses once she started earning, my father admitted, his voice tight with embarrassment. But resident salaries are lower than we realized, and she has her own student loans to manage. The irony was almost too perfect. After sacrificing my education fund for Angela's medical school, my parents were facing financial hardship while she prioritized her own needs above theirs, just as they had taught her to do through years of example. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it despite the complicated emotions swirling beneath the surface. Your mother wants to talk to you, my father said, and before I could respond, my mother's voice came through the line. Dwayne, honey, is that really you? Something in her tone, a vulnerability I wasn't accustomed to hearing, caught me off guard. Yes, Mom, it's me. We've missed you so much, she said, her voice breaking slightly. The house feels empty, especially during the holidays. Angela hasn't been home for Christmas since last year. Her schedule at the hospital is so demanding. We understand, of course, but... She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. With Angela unavailable, they were turning to their backup child, the one they had always considered secondary. The realization should have angered me, but instead I felt a strange hollowness. Mom, I've built a life here in Seattle, I said gently. I can't just drop everything because Angela is busy. I know, she hurried to say. You're doing so well from what we can tell. Your father saw on LinkedIn about your new consulting business. We're proud of you, Dwayne. We really are. Too little too late, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I asked, have you talked to Angela about your financial situation? A pause. She has her own struggles right now. The residency hours are brutal, and she's trying to establish herself. We don't want to burden her. But it's okay to hint about it to me. The words came out sharper than I intended. That's not what this is about, my mother protested, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. We genuinely want to see you to try and, I don't know, bridge this gap that's grown between us. After ending the call with a non-committal promise to think about their invitation, I sat at my desk staring at the Seattle skyline visible from my condo window. The familiar mix of resentment and longing washed over me, anger at their continued pattern of favoritism, coupled with the persistent childlike desire to believe they might finally see me clearly. That evening I met Sarah for dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant. Over green curry and spring rolls, I recounted the conversation with my parents. What are you thinking? She asked after I finished. Her question was genuine, not leading me toward any particular response, but inviting honest reflection. Part of me wants to tell them to figure it out themselves, I admitted. They made their choices. But another part wonders if this might be a chance for real conversation, for them to finally understand the impact of what they did. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Just remember that closure doesn't always come from other people acknowledging what they did wrong. Sometimes it comes from you deciding it doesn't control you anymore. Her words stayed with me as I deliberated over the next few days. Brandon joined the discussion during our weekend hike around Discovery Park, offering his perspective as someone who had cautiously rebuilt a relationship with his own parents years after their initial rejection. The key is boundaries, he emphasized as we looked out over Puget Sound. You can see them without falling back into old patterns, but only if you're doing it for the right reasons, not because you're still seeking their approval. My decision crystallized when I noticed a social media post from Angela, photos of her enjoying a European vacation with her medical school friends. The timestamp showed it had been posted just days after my parents' call about their financial difficulties. The caption read, "Much-needed break before the holiday hospital shifts treat yourself doctor life." Curiosity drove me to dig deeper. I discovered she had been posting regular updates about her trip for the past week. A Christmas market in Munich, a luxury hotel in Prague skiing in the Alps, all while my parents worried about making their mortgage payment. A quick calculation suggested the trip had cost thousands of dollars, money that could have helped the parents who had sacrificed so much for her education. The contrast between her choices and my own careful financial management despite far less family support was stark. Further investigation revealed my parents had remortgaged their home just 18 months earlier to provide Angela with nearly $50,000 for a down payment on her Baltimore townhouse. This after already draining their retirement accounts to cover expenses related to her medical education. The pattern was painfully clear. They had consistently compromised their own financial security to support Angela's lifestyle choices, while expecting me to fend for myself. Now that their resources were depleted, and Angela was focused on her own priorities, they were turning to me, the child they had deemed less worthy of investment. After several days of deliberation, I made my decision. I would go to Pennsylvania for Christmas, but on my own terms. I booked a flight to Harrisburg and reserved a hotel room in Lancaster rather than staying at my parents' house. The physical boundary seemed important, a clear signal that while I was open to conversation, I wasn't simply sliding back into my old role in the family system. As I packed for the trip, I felt a strange mix of dread and something like hope. Not hope that my parents would suddenly transform into the supportive figures I had always longed for, but hope that perhaps I had transformed enough to face them without being diminished by their perception of me. The night before my flight, I sat on my balcony watching Seattle's holiday lights twinkle across the water. Whatever happened in Pennsylvania, I would return to this city that had become my home, to the life I had built with my own hands, to people who valued me for exactly who I was. That knowledge gave me a foundation my younger self had never possessed. The security of knowing my worth didn't depend on anyone else's ability to recognize it. The flight to Harrisburg felt like traveling backward in time. As the plane descended through clouds into the familiar Pennsylvania landscape, memories surfaced with unexpected intensity. Childhood Christmases, family dinners, moments of both belonging and exclusion in the home I was about to revisit. I had arranged to rent a car rather than having my parents pick me up, another small but significant boundary. The drive from the airport to Lancaster took me past landmarks that seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. The mall where I had worked one summer during high school, the park where I had learned to ride a bike, the library where I had discovered my passion for programming. My hotel was downtown, a renovated historic building that represented the upscale turn the city had taken in recent years. After checking in and refreshing from the flight, I texted my parents to let them know I had arrived safely and would come by their house that evening. The neighborhood looked much as I remembered. Modest homes with neat yards, holiday decorations adorning porches and windows. But as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I noticed signs of neglect that hadn't been present during my youth. The paint was peeling around the window frames. The front steps showed cracks that had been patched rather than properly repaired. The landscaping, once my mother's pride, appeared haphazard and overgrown in places. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that contained equal parts joy and anxiety. She had aged more than the 3 years warranted. New lines around her eyes, gray hair she hadn't bothered to color. "Dwayne," she breathed, reaching for a hug. That I returned somewhat stiffly. "You look so different." She wasn't wrong. The lanky, uncertain young man who had left Pennsylvania had been replaced by someone more confident, more physically fit from regular soccer games, more polished in appearance. Success and self-assurance had transformed me in ways that clearly surprised her. My father appeared behind her, extending his hand for a handshake that felt oddly formal for a parent and child. "Good to see you, son," he said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "Thanks for coming." The house interior revealed further evidence of financial strain. Furniture that had grown shabby without replacement, a television that was now outdated, small repairs left undone. The Christmas tree in the corner seemed sparse compared to the elaborate decorations of my youth, though they had placed the same familiar ornaments on its branches, including several I had made as a child. Conversation was awkward at first, focusing on safe topics like my flight, the weather, and Seattle changes in the Lancaster community. We carefully avoided any mention of Angela finances or the past conflicts that hung between us like an invisible barrier. Over dinner, a lasagna my mother had prepared as it had once been my favorite, they asked cautious questions about my work. I found myself explaining cloud security protocols and the basics of my consulting business to parents who had once dismissed computers as a hobby rather than a legitimate career path. "So these companies pay you to find weaknesses in their systems?" my father asked, genuine interest in his voice. "Essentially, yes," I replied. "I identify vulnerabilities before malicious hackers can exploit them, then develop solutions to strengthen their security infrastructure. And this pays well." He couldn't quite hide the surprise in his tone. I met his gaze directly. "Very well. My billing rate starts at $300 per hour for consulting services, with project fees often running into six figures." Their expressions, a mixture of shock, pride, and perhaps regret, told me everything their words couldn't. They had never imagined this level of success for me, especially without the prestigious education they had prioritized for Angela. As the evening progressed, I noticed photos of Angela prominently displayed throughout the house. Her medical school graduation, white coat ceremony, various achievements throughout her life. By contrast, the few photos of me were older, from high school or before, nothing documenting my adult accomplishments or current life. The observation stung but also reinforced why I had needed to leave. Even in my absence, the imbalance persisted. Angela remained the child whose achievements were celebrated and displayed while mine went unacknowledged. The next day, Christmas Eve, brought a gathering of extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Their curious glances and careful questions suggested they had heard versions of the family rift but weren't sure how to navigate it. "Seattle must be exciting," my Aunt Judy commented during dinner. "We always knew you were smart, but starting your own business already. That's impressive." "Unlike some fields, tech rewards results more than credentials," I replied, the subtle reference to Angela's path not lost on my parents, who exchanged glances across the table. The elephant in the room became larger when my mother's phone chimed with a text. Her face fell slightly as she read it. "Angela won't be joining us tomorrow," she announced to the table. "There's been a scheduling change at the hospital, and she's needed for an important case." The excuse sounded hollow, particularly given what I had seen of Angela's European vacation on social media. But my parents nodded in resigned acceptance, clearly accustomed to her absences and excuses. "Such important work she's doing," my father added, as if to justify her choice to the extended family. "Saving lives comes first." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that Angela's Instagram story from that morning had shown her brunching with friends in Baltimore, not working a hospital shift. Some patterns never changed. After the relatives departed, leaving behind leftovers and well wishes, the house fell into an uncomfortable silence. The three of us sat in the living room, Christmas tree lights twinkling in the growing darkness, the weight of unspoken words becoming unbearable. "Why did you really want me to come home?" I finally asked, breaking the facade of normalcy we had maintained for the past 2 days. My parents exchanged glances. My father cleared his throat. "Because you're our son, and we've missed you. For 3 years you barely reached out," I pointed out. "The occasional text on birthdays or holidays. No real attempts to visit or understand my life. What changed?" The direct question hung in the air. My mother looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "We've realized some things," my father finally said, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "About our choices, about how we treated you, compared to Angela. And it took 3 years of me being gone to realize that I kept my tone, even not accusatory, but not letting them off the hook either. It took seeing the consequences," my mother admitted quietly. "Angela is. She's not like you, Dwayne. She takes, and we gave and gave because we thought that's what parents should do. But she doesn't." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "She doesn't give back," I finished for her. "She doesn't consider your needs the way you've always considered hers." My father's eyes filled with tears. something I had never seen in my childhood. I was wrong, he said, the words clearly difficult for him, about so many things, about what success looks like, about what makes a person valuable. The admission cracked something open in the room, a door to honesty that had been sealed shut throughout my childhood and young adulthood. You took my future, I said simply. You took money specifically set aside for me and gave it to Angela because you believed her dreams mattered more than mine. Do you understand what that communicated to me? My mother wiped tears from her cheeks. That you mattered less, that we valued you less. The straightforward acknowledgement, something they had always denied or minimized in the past, hit me with unexpected force. For years I had wanted them to simply admit the truth of what they had done and its impact on me. I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch, I continued. I had to create opportunities for myself that you should have helped provide the way you did for Angela. And the irony is that I've ended up more financially stable than both of you and Angela combined. My father nodded slowly. You've always been resourceful, independent. We took advantage of that, telling ourselves you would be fine regardless. It was easier than acknowledging we were being unfair. The conversation continued late into the night, painful, honest, occasionally heated, but ultimately more genuine than any interaction we had ever had as a family. They detailed the financial decisions that had led to their current predicament. Multiple home equity loans to support Angela's education and lifestyle credit card debt accumulated covering her expenses, retirement accounts drawn down. Prematurely. We kept expecting her to step up once she was established, my mother explained, to help us the way we helped her. But there's always another expense, another reason why she can't contribute. You taught her that, I pointed out, not unkindly. You taught her that her needs automatically outweigh everyone else's. Why would she suddenly develop consideration she was never expected to show? My father rubbed his face wearily. You're right. We created this situation, all of it, including losing our relationship with you. As Christmas morning dawned, we exchanged modest gifts. A handmade scarf from my mother, a book about tech entrepreneurs from my father, a Seattle-themed gift basket from me. The presents were less important than the new atmosphere between us. Tentative, fragile, but more honest than ever before. I need you both to understand something, I said as we sat with coffee after breakfast. I didn't come back to bail you out financially. I can't be the solution to problems created by the same pattern that hurt me. They nodded, disappointment, visible but acceptance too. But I do want to help you develop a realistic financial plan, I continued. One that includes clear boundaries with Angela and prioritizes your retirement security. Relief washed over their faces. Not the quick fix they might have secretly hoped for, but support of a more sustainable kind. And I'm willing to work on our relationship, but it has to be different than before. Equal, respectful of my choices and path, with acknowledgement of the past rather than pretending it didn't happen. We want that too, my mother said softly. We're proud of the man you've become, Dwayne. We just wish we could take credit for more of it. You can take credit for teaching me resilience, I replied after a moment. I learned to rely on myself because I had to. That served me well even if the lesson was painful. Before leaving Lancaster, I helped my parents create a spreadsheet tracking their expenses, debts, and income. I showed them how to negotiate with creditors and develop a sustainable budget. Most importantly, I helped them draft an email to Angela, explaining that they could no longer provide financial support and would in fact need her to begin repaying some of what they had invested in her education. The response from Angela came while I was still there. Indignant, self-justifying, accusing them of favoring me suddenly after years of prioritizing her. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. She'll adjust, I told my parents as they struggled with guilt over setting this boundary, just like I had to adjust when you couldn't support my education. The difference is, she's had advantages I never did, and she's an adult now, not a teenager. As I prepared to return to Seattle, our goodbyes were different than I had anticipated. No dramatic reconciliation, no promises that everything would be perfect moving forward. Instead, there was something more valuable, mutual respect, and a commitment to continue the honest dialogue we had begun. We'll do better, my father said as he hugged me at the airport. Not just with money, but with being the parents you deserved all along. And I'll try to call more often, I promised. Not because I'm obligated, but because I choose to. The flight back to Seattle felt lighter somehow, as if I had left behind baggage I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Sarah and Brandon met me at the airport, their familiar faces a reminder of the life I had built for myself. A life that was no longer defined by what my family had failed to give me, but by what I had created on my own terms. As the new year approached, I hosted a small gathering in my condo for the friends who had become my chosen family. Standing on my balcony overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From a betrayed and wounded young man to someone capable of confronting the past without being consumed by it. My parents and I continued our tentative reconciliation through regular phone calls and more honest communication than we had ever managed before. They reported that Angela had reacted poorly to their financial boundaries at first, but was slowly adjusting to the new reality. Our family would never be what I had once wished for as a child, but perhaps it could become something authentic and respectful in its place. The greatest lesson I had learned was that true worth isn't determined by others' assessment of your value. It's built through resilience in the face of betrayal, through creating success on your own terms, and through the courage to confront painful truths rather than avoiding them. Life doesn't always give us the support we deserve, but it gives us opportunities to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. My parents' betrayal had forced me to forge my own path, and that path had led to a life more fulfilling than the one that might have been handed to me. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone you trusted let you down? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might help someone else feeling alone in their struggle. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more real-life journeys of overcoming betrayal and finding success against the odds. Remember, sometimes the most painful chapters of our stories lead to the most triumphant endings. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey of healing and growth.